Chapter 1. Introduction. Why Mozart Still Fascinates Today. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart is one of the best-known and most revered composers in the history of music. His name stands not only for extraordinary talent, but also for an artistic expressiveness that is timeless and universal. Mozart fascinates people to this day, not only because of the technical brilliance of his works, but also because of the emotional depth, the diversity of his compositions, and the unique ease with which he knew how to create even the most complex structures. His fascination with Mozart begins with his life. He was born on 27 January 1756 in Salzburg, a small but culturally vibrant city in what was then the Holy Roman Empire. His extraordinary musical talent became apparent early on, which made him a true child prodigy. At the age of 5, he was already able to play the piano and write simple compositions. His father, Leopold Mozart, recognized his son's extraordinary talent and promoted it with the greatest consistency. Even in his childhood, Wolfgang was sent on journeys, became acquainted with various European musical traditions, and performed in front of the courts of the continent. Mozart's life, however, was not only a continuous splendor on stages and courts. It was marked by hard work, financial difficulties, and personal challenges. Despite his fame, he often had to struggle with money problems, had to try to get commissions, and was dependent on the changing moods of the public and the powerful. This tension between artistic freedom, public recognition, and economic insecurity shapes the image of Mozart as a person who was equally marked by genius and human fragility. What also makes Mozart unique is the range of his compositions. He created works in almost all genres common at the time: operas, symphonies, concertos, chamber music, sacred music, and songs. Each of these areas shows not only technical prowess, but also a profound emotional resonance. Mozart's music can be humorous, dramatic, affectionate, or sublime, often even within a single work. This ability to portray different moods and characters with apparent ease is a central feature of his genius. In addition, people are fascinated by the legends and myths that surround Mozart. From child prodigy to tragic genius, from eccentric loner to celebrated star of courtly society, Mozart's life provides material for countless stories that surround his music with an aura of myth. This mixture of extraordinary talent, emotional depth, artistic versatility, and biographical drama makes him an icon of classical music to this day. In this script, we'll trace Mozart's life, work, and impact in detail. Starting with his childhood in Salzburg and the influences that shaped his early work, we'll shed light on his travels, the highlights of his work, his operas and instrumental works, and his personal challenges. We'll trace the path that took him from a child prodigy to one of the greatest composers of all time, and examine the lasting impact of his music on subsequent generations. Mozart is thus not only a product of his time, but also a timeless symbol of artistic excellence. His works are a mirror of human feelings, an expression of intellect and emotion, of order and creativity. And it is precisely this combination that makes him a composer whose music continues to move and inspire generations to this day. Chapter 2. Salzburg in the 18th Century, Mozart's Birthplace. Salzburg in the 18th century was a city that seemed tranquil at first glance, but had a remarkable cultural and political dynamism. The city was nestled between the Alps and the Salzburg Basin, surrounded by hills, rivers, and the splendor of Baroque architecture. It had been a center of the salt trade since the Middle Ages, which brought prosperity to the region, and had become a cultural hub that combined both religious and secular traditions. Politically, Salzburg was under the rule of the Prince Archbishop, who was both spiritual and secular head of the city. This dual role gave the government stability, but also tight control. The Prince Archbishop ruled with a court that was strongly oriented towards the European courts, and promoted art, music, and architecture as an expression of his reputation. Especially in the 18th century, the focus was on magnificent church buildings, squares, and palaces, which made Salzburg a Baroque, glittering city. Musically, Salzburg already had a long tradition. Church music played a central role because the cathedral and the many monasteries were not only religious centers but also training centers for musicians. Families of musicians enjoyed prestige, and talents were nurtured to create both liturgical and secular music. This environment provided ideal conditions for young musicians: access to instruments, lessons from experienced teachers, and the opportunity to participate in concerts in churches, residences, and public performances. For the Mozart family, this city offered a perfect environment. Leopold Mozart, Wolfgang's father, was himself a musician and composer at the court of the Prince Archbishop. His position allowed him to pass on his knowledge and promote his son's career. Salzburg was thus not only home, but also a cultural laboratory in which Wolfgang could take his first steps in music and composition. But Salzburg was also characterized by clear social hierarchies and strict expectations. Society was strongly structured by religion and class differences. Artists and musicians had to prove themselves at court or in church. Their position was often dependent on favor and talent. For young prodigies like Mozart, this meant that while outstanding talent could open doors, pressure, discipline, and obedience were also required. Economically, the city benefited from the salt trade, handicraft production, and a growing number of cultural events that attracted visitors from the surrounding area. Concerts, theater performances, and festivals were regular highlights of social life. Children and young people who showed musical talent had the opportunity to perform in front of an attentive audience, an aspect that had a decisive influence on Mozart's early career. The combination of Baroque splendor, religious significance, cultural diversity, and economic stability made Salzburg a unique breeding ground for young talent. Wolfgang Amadeus grew up in this environment, which offered both inspiration and challenge. The city not only imparted musical knowledge to him, but also the idea that art and social position were closely linked. Salzburg in the 18th century was much more than Mozart's birthplace. It was a city where religion, power, trade, and art merged, a place where music was understood as an expression of education, status, and faith, and where the young genius was able to lay the first foundations for his later works. Chapter 3: Childhood and Musical Environment. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was born on 27 January 1756 in Salzburg and grew up in an environment that fostered his extraordinary talent from the very beginning. His father, Leopold Mozart, was himself a renowned musician, composer, and pedagogue who worked at the court of the Prince Archbishop. He recognized his son's extraordinary abilities early on and devoted much of his energy and knowledge to the musical education of Wolfgang, and later also of his sister Maria Anna Mozart, who was also a talented musician. Mozart's childhood was marked by intensive musical education. At the age of 3, he began to play simple melodies on the piano. At the age of 4, he wrote his first small compositions. Leopold kept detailed records of his son's progress, documenting not only the extraordinary precision but also the creative intuition with which the boy explored musical structures. This early support was decisive. It combined rigorous technique with the space to develop one's own musical ideas. In addition to home education, Mozart benefited from Salzburg's rich musical environment. The cathedral, the numerous monasteries, and the court of the Prince Archbishop gave him access to performances, concerts, and masterclasses. Young musicians were able to sing in choirs, learn to play instruments, and take part in performances, a form of practical training that shaped Mozart's development. He learned how to compose and perform music for church use, for courtly ceremonies, and for public performance. Already in his childhood, Mozart accompanied his father on journeys through Europe to present his talents to court societies and nobles. These journeys were tough tests: long marches, strict schedules, performances in front of demanding audiences, and the pressure to always shine demanded discipline and perseverance from him. At the same time, these experiences opened up an insight into different musical styles. Italian opera, French chamber music, and German church music shaped his ear and broadened his creative horizons. Mozart's environment, however, was not only characterized by musical support. His childhood was also shaped by family structures and social expectations. Leopold Mozart attached great importance to obedience, order, and a clear daily structure. He was a mentor, teacher, and manager at the same time and set high standards for Wolfgang. This strict upbringing and early exposure to audiences laid the foundation for the discipline and ambition that accompanied Mozart throughout his life. Another decisive influence was the encounter with other artists. In Salzburg and on his travels, Mozart became acquainted with musicians, composers, and conductors from whom he adopted techniques and styles, developed them further, or consciously broke through them. These early contacts shaped his understanding of music as a living, dynamic art that builds on tradition but at the same time transcends it. In summary, Mozart's childhood and musical environment offered the ideal mix of talent, encouragement, experience, and challenge. The combination of early education, practical experience, travels, and the intensive care of his father created the basis for Mozart's later genius. It was during this time that he laid the foundations for the virtuosity, emotional depth, and creative diversity of his later works that would make him one of the greatest composers of all time. Chapter 4. The Early Prodigy Years. Mozart's childhood was marked not only by education and travel, but also by an extraordinary public attention that made him a child prodigy at the age of 5. Under the leadership of his father Leopold, Wolfgang Amadeus appeared early on in front of courtly audiences, nobles, and members of European societies, and his skills were admired and documented. This phase of his early career shaped not only his musical development, but also his self-image as an artist. As early as 1761, Mozart's family undertook their first major concert tour to Munich, where Wolfgang was introduced to the court of Elector Maximilian III Joseph. There, he not only played the piano with virtuosity, but also the violin, improvised by ear, and presented his own small compositions. The reactions were overwhelming. The young musician was celebrated as a child prodigy, his talent described as supernatural. These early appearances made him famous in European courts and established the basis for his later trips to Italy, Vienna, Paris, and London. Between 1762 and 1766, the family undertook extensive journeys through Europe. Mozart's abilities were tested in various cultural contexts. In Vienna, Mannheim, Paris, London, and the Italian cities of Rome, Milan, and Venice, he performed before kings, princes, and church representatives. Each city offered new musical challenges. Different pianos, orchestral instrumentations, styles, and expectations of the audience required adaptability and improvisational skills. Mozart mastered these demands with ease, a combination of natural talent and rigorous practice that set him apart from all others at a young age. However, the early child prodigy years were also psychologically and physically stressful. The long journeys were arduous, the public appearance stressful, and the constant expectation of extraordinary achievements weighed heavily on Wolfgang. Nevertheless, these experiences shaped his character. Discipline, perfectionism, and an awareness of public representation were shaped during this time. At the same time, he learned how music can function as a means of communication. It should not only be technically flawless, but also convey emotions and captivate the audience. Musically, this phase was marked by his first serious compositions. At the age of 6, Mozart was already writing minuets, small sonatas, and variations that seemed remarkably mature in their harmonic structures, melody, and expressiveness. The influence of Italian operas and French instrumental music, which he became acquainted with on his travels, can already be seen in these works. These early compositions display not only virtuosity, but also a remarkable sensitivity to form, balance, and expression, qualities that were to characterize Mozart's work throughout his life. The Wunderkind years were thus much more than just a phase of public admiration. They laid the foundation for Mozart's artistic personality, The combination of technical brilliance, emotional expressiveness, variety of styles, and innovative design. They established him as a musician of international standing, whose career did not begin by chance, but was the result of targeted support, extraordinary talent, and intensive work. With these early experiences, Mozart was ready to reach the next stage of his artistic development, the journeys to Italy that shaped his operatic art, expanded his compositional language, and finally introduced him to music history. Chapter 5. First Journeys Through Europe. Mozart's first journeys through Europe are among the most formative experiences of his life. They began when Wolfgang Amadeus was just 6 years old and lasted for several years. These journeys were not only performances as a child prodigy, but intensive phases of learning and observation that decisively shaped his musical understanding and compositional development. The Mozart family visited numerous courts, cities, and cultural scenes, including Munich, Vienna, Mannheim, Paris, London, and the Italian cities of Milan, Rome, and Naples. Each station brought new challenges, different instruments, varying performance traditions, different audience expectations, and their own musical styles. Mozart was forced to adapt flexibly, to improvise, and at the same time to preserve his compositional identity. In Munich and Vienna, he performed before princes and nobles. His virtuosity was particularly admired in Vienna, and the courtly representatives saw in the boy a mixture of entertainment and artistic aspirations. At the same time, Mozart encountered the musical heritage of Austrian composers here, became acquainted with works by Haydn, Gluck, and others, and expanded his repertoire. In Paris and London, he experienced the diversity of international music. In Paris, he impressed with his skills on the piano and the ability to implement musical ideas immediately. In London, where he stayed from 1764 to 1765, Mozart met, among others, Johann Christian Bach, the London Bach, whose style and harmonic language had a lasting influence on his early symphonies. It was here that Mozart learned the meaning of clarity, structure, and melodic elegance, elements that would later become characteristic of his Viennese works. The trips to Italy between 1769 and 1771 had a particularly profound impact on Mozart's operatic work. In cities such as Milan, Rome, Bologna, and Naples, he studied Italian opera traditions, attended performances, and met important composers such as Giovanni Battista Martini. Martini, who was considered one of the best teachers in Europe, recognized Mozart's extraordinary talent and gave him valuable suggestions on counterpoint and compositional technique. Mozart's operas from this period, including Mitridate, Re de Ponto 1770, already show a remarkable maturity in dramaturgy, characterization, and orchestral treatment. The trips were not only artistically formative, but also educational and personally challenging. Mozart had to learn to deal with long absences from his family, strict schedules, and the pressure of courtly expectations. At the same time, they offered the opportunity to get to know different languages, cultures, and forms of society, experiences that made him an open, flexible, and cosmopolitan artist. The first journeys through Europe thus laid the foundation for Mozart's later career as a composer and musician. They enabled him to internalize different musical styles, to establish contacts with important composers, to study opera traditions, and to develop his own musical language. The combination of virtuosity, willingness to learn, and cultural openness not only made him a child prodigy, but also prepared him to become a lifelong genius of music. Chapter 6. Mozart at the Munich and Viennese court. After his first travels through Europe, Mozart began to present his talent specifically to courtly circles. His stays at the courts in Munich and Vienna were particularly formative, which not only brought him public attention, but also important experience in courtly etiquette, music performance, and composition. These years laid the foundation for his later work as an opera and instrumental composer. In Munich, Mozart performed for the first time before the Elector Maximilian III, Joseph, who used art and music as an expression of his power and status. For Mozart, this meant that he not only had to demonstrate musical ability, but also had to meet the expectations of courtly representation, elegance, precision, decency, and self-confidence. His virtuoso piano playing and his ability to improvise spontaneously impressed audiences, and he received increasing invitations to concerts and private performances. In Munich, he also became acquainted with the opera tradition of the Southern German and Italian schools. The city was a center for the performance of Italian operas, and Mozart had the opportunity to hear works by Hasse, Gluck, and other contemporary composers. In particular, the combination of melody, dramaturgy, and expressiveness shaped his own development. Even during this period, he experimented with short opera fragments and early symphonic sketches, which showed his ability to combine the structures of the Italian style with his own musical language. His stay in Vienna, which was the cultural heart of the Habsburg Empire at the time, opened the doors to the highest circles of musical life even further for Mozart. Here he performed both at official events and in private salons, and expanded his network. In particular, his encounters with court musicians, composers such as Johann Georg Albrechtsberger, and the early works of Joseph Haydn had a lasting influence on his development. Vienna offered him a mixture of artistic inspiration, competition, and social challenges. The constant balance between pressure to perform, courtly expectations, and artistic freedom. At the Munich and Viennese courts, Mozart also became acquainted with the mechanisms of commissioning and patronage. Composition was not only an art here, but also a form of professional survival. He had to understand how to acquire commissions, which plays were required for which occasion, and how to address the audience, from the princely court to wealthy citizens. These experiences shaped his later works, in which he always found a balance between artistic originality and public expectation. In addition to the artistic and social experiences, these stays also offered Mozart insights into technology and instrumentation. He got to know the orchestral lineups, studied the sound possibilities of various instruments, and began to implement this knowledge in his symphonies and concertos. At the same time, he developed a sense of how music can express emotions, a skill that would play a central role in his operas and late instrumental works. His time at the courts of Munich and Vienna thus marked a decisive phase in Mozart's development. It combined early childhood virtuosity with professional experience, shaped his artistic personality, and prepared him for the complex demands of European musical life. Mozart learned to develop his genius within social structures, thus laying the foundation for the masterpieces that were to be created in the years to come. Chapter 7. Journeys to Italy and Encounters with Opera Tradition. The journeys to Italy between 1769 and 1773 are among the formative periods in Mozart's artistic development. For the then 13-year-old composer, they were not only a test of his musical ability, but also an intensive encounter with the Italian opera tradition, which was to have a lasting influence on him. Italy was the center of opera at the time, with cities such as Milan, Rome, Naples, and Venice regularly performing works by composers such as Niccolò Jommelli, Giovanni Battista Pergolesi, and Giovanni Battista Martini. Mozart used these trips to study the styles and forms of Italian opera in detail. In Milan, he heard operas that were characterized by clear melody, dramatic structure, and expressive arias. He was particularly impressed by the ability to portray characters musically. Heroes, villains, lovers, and comic characters were each given a specific musical language that directly transported action and emotions. Mozart was to implement this principle masterfully in his later operas such as The Marriage of Figaro and Don Giovanni. During his time in Rome and Bologna, Mozart also became acquainted with compositional theory and practice. He met renowned teachers and composers, including Giovanni Battista Martini, who was considered an expert in counterpoint. Under Martini's guidance, Mozart deepened his understanding of harmonic progressions, fugues, and compositional technique. He was able to systematically expand his previous knowledge and at the same time integrate Italian melody and opera aesthetics. But the journeys did not only have artistic dimensions. They were also a form of testing his adaptability. Mozart had to adapt to different social contexts, courtly customs, and expectations of patrons and audiences. In Naples, for example, he experienced that the stage had strict hierarchies and that the favor of the audience was decisive for success. He learned the importance of timing, dramaturgy, and the combination of music, text, and acting. An important milestone of these journeys was the composition of the opera Mithridate, Re di Ponto, 1770, for Milan. This opera, which Mozart wrote at the age of only 14, already shows a remarkable maturity. Complex arias, dramatic arcs of suspense, and differentiated character drawings. The work was performed at Milan's Teatro Regio and received great acclaim, an early testament to Mozart's ability to master the Italian operatic tradition while introducing his own innovative elements. The trips to Italy thus offered Mozart a cultural and musical broadening of his horizons. They combined theoretical learning, practical experience, and public performances, deepening his knowledge of opera forms, orchestration, melody, and drama. At the same time, social skills developed. Courtly etiquette, dealing with criticism, networking, and understanding of different performance cultures were practiced. These experiences laid the foundation for Mozart's later operatic career. They explained his ability to use music as a dramatic tool, shaping characters through melody while combining technical virtuosity and emotional expressiveness. The journeys to Italy were thus not only journeys of the child, who appeared as a child prodigy, but an intensive training as an opera composer, the effect of which is evident in all of Mozart's later masterpieces. Chapter 8. Return to Salzburg. Conflicts and Opportunities. After his formative journeys to Italy, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart returned to Salzburg in 1773, a step that was to mark both opportunities and conflicts in his life. The return to his hometown meant that the now youthful composer came back under the supervision of his father and the Prince Archbishop Gerhard von Colloredo. For Mozart, this was on the one hand the opportunity to put his artistic maturity into practice, but on the other hand, it brought him into an environment that often limited his growing independence. In Salzburg, Mozart took on official duties at the court, including the composition of church music, the conducting of concerts, and the musical training of choirs. His father Leopold continued to organize his career, with a focus on stable jobs and regular performances. Mozart, on the other hand, now a youthful virtuoso with international experience, strove for greater artistic freedom. This led to the first tensions between him and his father, who continued to favor traditional career paths at court, and between him and the Prince Archbishop, who expected an obedient court musician. Despite these tensions, Salzburg also offered valuable chances. The city had a thriving music scene that included performances of operas, concerts, and sacred music. Mozart used these opportunities to compose new works, including smaller operas, symphonies, and chamber music, which demonstrated both his virtuosity and his understanding of dramatic and orchestral effects. In particular, the composition for church music, such as the Missa Brevis and the Vesperae Solennes de Confessore, showed his ability to combine liturgical requirements with artistic originality. Another aspect was the pedagogical role that Mozart took on. He taught young musicians and participated in the training of choristers. This activity not only sharpened his awareness of musical structure, but also his ability to convey complex content in an understandable way, a competence that he later developed further in his work with singers and orchestras in Vienna. Despite these chances, Salzburg became increasingly frustrating for Mozart. The close control of his father and Prince Archbishop, the limited repertoire of tasks, and the limited opportunity to distinguish himself as an opera composer and virtuoso nationwide led to growing dissatisfaction. Mozart began to think about a permanent departure from Salzburg in order to be able to develop his musical vision more freely in Vienna or other European metropolises. During this phase, he was already writing works that anticipated his future development. Symphonies with expanded orchestral instrumentation, chamber music that featured innovative harmonic twists, and the first approaches to operas that went beyond the traditional boundaries of the Salzburg stage. Salzburg thus offered a complex mixture of support, experience, and limitation, which Mozart used both as a teacher and as a field of tension for his desire for independence. The return to Salzburg was thus a decisive period in Mozart's life. He consolidated his skills, expanded his repertoire of works, and at the same time recognized the limits that his hometown set for him. This realization ultimately led to the great decisions of his life: the permanent renunciation of Salzburg, the search for artistic freedom in Vienna, and the development of his masterpieces, which were to make him one of the greatest composers in music history. Chapter 9: Paris and the Death of the Mother. In 1777, Mozart began a decisive journey to Paris, which took him out of the relative safety of Salzburg and into the international music scene. Accompanied by his mother Anna Maria Mozart, he first traveled to Mannheim, which was known for its excellent orchestral tradition, and from there on to Paris. The trip was intended to open up artistic opportunities as well as strengthen family ties, as his mother supported Wolfgang at his performances and at the same time paid attention to the education of his sister Nannerl. Paris was a center of European music and culture at the time. The city offered Mozart the opportunity to show his compositional talent in front of a demanding audience, to exchange ideas with contemporary composers, and to get to know the French opera tradition. Here he was able to experience the range of musical expression, from courtly concerts to church music to public performances in theaters. His virtuosity as a pianist and his sense of melody and orchestration impressed the Parisian audience, but his success was limited by various factors. During the journey, Mozart suffered a heavy personal blow of fate: the death of his mother. Anna Maria Mozart died in Paris in 1778, an experience that deeply shook Wolfgang. The loss of his closest caregiver, who had accompanied and supported him since childhood, not only left an emotional emptiness, but also influenced his work and his decision to leave Salzburg for good. The death of his mother made it clear that he was no longer completely under his father's care, and strengthened his desire for independence. In Paris, Mozart continued his composing activities and wrote works that further developed his style. The chamber music and the small symphonies from this period in particular show an increasing maturity, which manifests itself in harmonic refinement, melodic clarity, and orchestral innovation. At the same time, he reflected the French models and integrated elements of Parisian musical taste, making his works accessible to a wide audience. The time in Paris was thus doubly formative. On the one hand, it offered a stage for Mozart's artistic skills and the opportunity to make contacts that influenced his later career. On the other hand, it confronted him with the reality of personal losses and challenges that had a lasting impact on his development as an artist and as a person. The death of his mother marked the end of immediate family control over Mozart's life and ushered in the transition to a phase in which he increasingly had to act as an independent composer and musician. The experiences of these years, the test in front of an international audience, the encounter with new musical traditions, and the handling of personal pain laid the foundation for Mozart's later success in Vienna. They prepared him to master the ups and downs of his life as an artist, infusing his music with emotional depth, technical brilliance, and universal expressiveness. Chapter 10: Vienna as the New Center of Life. After the formative experiences in Paris and the tragic loss of his mother, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart decided to make Vienna the new center of his life. In 1781, he finally moved to the imperial metropolis, which, as the cultural center of Europe, offered a variety of opportunities for an independent composer. Vienna was a city full of music lovers, wealthy patrons, theaters, and opera stages, a place where talent could be immediately recognized, nurtured, and celebrated. Mozart entered Vienna at a time when the city was flourishing musically. The tradition of the classical Viennese school was already established, and composers such as Joseph Haydn shaped musical life. At the same time, the city offered a dynamic, often competitive environment. Concert events, opera premieres, and private salons required Mozart not only to have exceptional talent, but also the ability to market himself, make contacts, and meet the expectations of a discerning audience. In Vienna, Mozart began to fully live his independence from the Prince Archbishop of Salzburg and from his father. He accepted private commissions, composed for aristocrats, organized his own concerts, and used the urban audience to present his works. This independence was a decisive step. He now had to take care of himself economically, actively build his reputation, and at the same time, combine artistic quality and innovation. The city also offered Mozart the opportunity to expand his compositional spectrum. In Vienna, he wrote numerous piano sonatas, symphonies, and chamber music works that demonstrated his technical ability and expressiveness. The concertos for piano and orchestra in particular allowed him to show his virtuosity as a pianist and to develop new forms of musical dramaturgy. Vienna offered him a stage on which his instrumental music could unfold, and at the same time, it opened up new paths in opera, which was soon to become his main sphere of activity. Mozart also became acquainted with the courtly and bourgeois salons in Vienna. These private performance spaces were crucial for establishing contacts with patrons and supporters. Here, Mozart was able to present his works in a more intimate setting, but also to receive first-hand feedback and adapt his compositions specifically to the preferences of the audience. Such experiences sharpened his sense of dramaturgy, melody, and audience expectations. Another aspect was social networking. In Vienna, Mozart met musicians, composers, poets, and theater people who broadened his creative horizons. His contacts with the Viennese court musicians, conductors, and opera directors were particularly formative. They gave him insights into performance practice, orchestra leadership, and scenic staging, which he later masterfully used in his operas. The decision to make Vienna the center of his life was therefore both an artistic and personal decision. It meant detachment from Salzburg, the step into an independent life as an artist, and the challenge of asserting oneself in a demanding international environment. In Vienna, Mozart was finally able to develop his full potential. He composed, performed, developed innovative musical structures, and laid the foundation for the creative phase that was to make his operas and instrumental works known worldwide. Vienna thus became the center of Mozart's artistic life, a place where he could combine his extraordinary abilities with the demands of a highly developed music scene and which decisively shaped his development from a child prodigy to one of the greatest composers in history. Chapter 11. Mozart's marriage to Constanze Weber. In Vienna, where Mozart had consolidated his artistic independence, his private life also began a new phase. A central turning point was his relationship with Constanze Weber, whom he married in 1782. Constanze came from a family of musicians. Her sister Aloysia Weber was a singer herself and had previously inspired Mozart. The connection with Constanze was both an emotional support and a decisive factor for his personal stability in a phase of intense professional activities. The relationship with Constanze was not without resistance. Mozart's father Leopold was initially against the marriage and feared that the marriage could jeopardize his career. But Mozart prevailed and consciously decided to live independently in Vienna, regardless of family restrictions. The marriage thus marked a clear separation from his father's authoritarian role and the assumption of personal responsibility for his life, both privately and professionally. The wedding also offered Mozart social stability in an often uncertain environment. Vienna was a city full of opportunities, but also full of challenges: financial uncertainty, high competitive pressure, and changeable patrons. Constanza not only supported him emotionally, but was also helpful in organizational matters. She took care of household matters, contacts, and social obligations, which allowed Mozart to concentrate more on his compositional work. The marriage also had artistic effects. Constanza, herself musically educated, often sang Mozart songs and was actively involved in his chamber music and vocal projects. Her voice and musical understanding influenced the design of some vocal works, and her presence enabled Mozart to tailor his compositions specifically to the abilities of singers. In the years after the wedding, Mozart and Constanza started a family and had a total of 6 children, but only 2 of them reached adulthood. This private responsibility shaped Mozart's everyday life, financial planning, and compositional practice. Despite the family burdens, he managed to create some of his most important works during this period, including symphonies, concertos, and operas. The marriage to Constanza was thus not only a private milestone, but an integral part of Mozart's life in Vienna. It stabilized him emotionally, supported his artistic productivity, and enabled him to master the challenges of a career as an independent composer. At the same time, the partnership provided the basis for family ties that sustained Mozart during his intense creative period, an aspect that is often overlooked but crucial to understanding his productive years in Vienna. The connection between Mozart and Constanza thus showed the symbiosis of private happiness and artistic creation. While he shone on stage and in the concert hall, it ensured him stability, inspiration, and practical support. This balance between personal ties and artistic ambition was a central factor in Mozart's creative highlights in the Vienna years.
Chapter 12. The Breakthrough as an Opera Composer. The Abduction from the Seraglio. Mozart's career in Vienna reached a decisive turning point in 1782 with the composition of the Singspiel opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio. This work marked his breakthrough as an opera composer in the capital and made him known to a wide audience. It combined Mozart's virtuosity, his dramatic flair, and his ability to shape characters musically in a way that had hardly been seen before. The Singspiel was a popular genre in Vienna. It combined spoken dialogue with musical numbers, making operas more accessible and entertaining. Mozart used this form to make the plot not only musically but also emotionally convincing. The story, which tells of love, jealousy, and adventure, offered him the opportunity to portray the characters in a differentiated and expressive musical way. A particularly innovative aspect of the opera was Mozart's handling of orchestra and voice. He used the instruments not only for accompaniment, but also used them to amplify emotions, build tension, and differentiate moods. Arias, duets, and ensembles are composed in such a way that they make characters and conflicts immediately audible. The virtuosity of the singers was demanded without losing musical coherence and expressiveness. The premiere on 16 July 1782 in Vienna was a complete success. The audience responded enthusiastically, and Mozart received recognition from critics and patrons alike. It is particularly noteworthy that he had a lasting influence on the Viennese opera landscape with this work. He showed that a composer can combine both technical brilliance and dramatic depth in an easily accessible Singspiel. The Abduction from the Seraglio not only marked an artistic breakthrough, but also consolidated Mozart's position in Vienna as a leading composer for operas and public concerts. It opened up new opportunities for commissions, contacts with important singers, and the recognition of a wide audience. At the same time, opera laid the foundation for his later masterpieces such as Le Nozze di Figaro, Don Giovanni, and Die Zauberflöte, in which he further perfected the dramatic design, characterization, and orchestral sophistication. This work shows how Mozart redefined the form of opera. He combined entertainment and artistic innovation, emotionality and structure, virtuosity and humanity. It is an early example of the ability to use music as a means of character drawing and dramatic action, a hallmark that runs through all of his operatic art. The abduction from the symbolizes was thus the first major step that established Mozart not only as a virtuoso but also as a composer to be taken seriously for the theater. The opera opened doors to new artistic challenges for him and marked the beginning of a phase in which his name and his works were to have a lasting impact on the Viennese music scene.
Chapter 13. Mozart's Instrumental Music, Symphonies and Concertos. In addition to his operatic works, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart shaped the instrumental genre in an unprecedented variety and quality. He showed an extraordinary talent for the piano and violin at an early age. But in Vienna, he expanded his repertoire to include symphonies, piano concertos, chamber music, and orchestral music, which cemented his reputation as a universal genius. Mozart's symphonies are characterized by clear structure, melodic brilliance, and orchestral diversity. His early works from Salzburg and his travels to Italy already show an astonishing understanding of form, harmony, and instrumentation. In Vienna, he expanded this knowledge, composed symphonies for public performances and for private concerts in an aristocratic environment. Works such as Symphony No. 35 in D major, Hafner, or Symphony No. 38, Prague, demonstrates his ability to combine dramatic tension, elegant melodies, and orchestral colors in a masterful balance. Particularly noteworthy are his piano concertos, in which Mozart redefined soloistic virtuosity with orchestral interaction. Unlike many of his predecessors, the orchestra is not only an accompaniment for Mozart, but an active partner. In concertos such as the Piano Concerto No. 21 in C major or No. 23 in A major, the orchestra develops dialogues with the soloist, comments on and expands the musical ideas, and creates a lively interplay between instruments and solo voice. These works combine technical brilliance with emotional depth and made Mozart one of the most important composers of the classical period Mozart also left a rich legacy in chamber music. String quartets, piano quartets, and quintets demonstrate his ability to lead several voices equally, to create dialogues between instruments, and to develop complex harmonic structures. Especially the late string quartets, such as the Haydn quartets, show a formal sophistication and emotional depth that combines Haydn's influence with Mozart's own style. A characteristic feature of Mozart's instrumental music is the melody. Even in the most complex structures, the melody remains clear and memorable, making the music immediately accessible to the listener. At the same time, he uses rhythmic variation, dynamic contrasts, and harmonic surprises to create tension and tell musical stories. This ability to combine technical mastery and emotional expression distinguishes Mozart's instrumental music from many other composers of the classical period to this day. In Vienna, public concerts and private salons offered Mozart the opportunity to present his instrumental music directly to a wide audience. Through his performances as a pianist and conductor, he was not only able to present his works, but also to interpret and develop them. The interplay of performance practice, improvisational virtuosity, and compositional innovation made him incomparable in the Viennese music scene. In summary, Mozart's instrumental music represents a synthesis of technique, emotion, and structure. Symphonies, concertos, and chamber music works show his ability to combine melodic beauty, dramatic effect, and orchestral finesse. They cemented his reputation as a composer of universal significance and laid the foundation for the everlasting impact that his music continues to have today. Chapter 14. Collaboration with Joseph II and the Golden Years in Vienna. In Vienna, Mozart achieved not only artistic maturity, but also social visibility, especially through his collaboration with Emperor Joseph II, who, as an enlightened monarch, attached great importance to the promotion of music, theater, and art. Often referred to as Mozart's golden years in Vienna, this period was crucial to his development as an opera and instrumental composer and cemented his reputation as a leading musician of his time. Emperor Joseph II had a clear vision. Music should represent both courtly aspirations and entertain the audience. For Mozart, this meant that his works had to be functional but at the same time artistically innovative. The collaboration with Joseph II began in particular with the production of Singspiels, which were characterized by a clear structure, lively dialogues, and catchy melodies. One of the best-known examples is The Abduction from the Seraglio, which already established Mozart's reputation as an opera composer in Vienna. The golden years were also characterized by an intensive creative period. Mozart composed numerous operas, symphonies, concertos, and chamber music works intended for both courtly and public spaces. Joseph II's support gave him not only financial security, but also access to the best singers, orchestras, and theaters. This allowed Mozart to fully develop his musical ideas and, at the same time, meet the demands of the audience and the court. An important aspect of this collaboration was the development of new opera forms. Joseph II attached great importance to comprehensibility and clear character drawing, which led Mozart to interlink plot and music more closely. Ensembles, arias, and recitatives were designed in such a way that they supported the dramaturgy and made the characters tangible in their psychological depth. This is particularly evident in operas such as Le Nozze di Figaro, where complex social and emotional situations are depicted with musical precision. The heyday years were also marked by intensive public appearances. Mozart played his own works as a pianist, conducted concerts, and worked in private salons of Viennese society. These performances increased his popularity, made new commissions possible, and consolidated his position as a leading composer and musician. At the same time, Mozart increasingly became the symbol of a new generation of artists who combined individual genius with social recognition. However, these years also brought challenges. Working with the court required discipline and adaptation. Financial uncertainty persisted despite commissions, and the high expectations of the public and patrons created constant pressure. Mozart had to learn to reconcile his artistic freedom with practical and social demands, a skill that decisively shaped him in later works. In summary, Mozart's heyday in Vienna was marked by the symbiosis of promotion, public presence, and artistic innovation. Working with Emperor Joseph II opened up opportunities for him that went far beyond what Salzburg could offer. Access to professional musicians, theaters, concerts, and an audience that understood and appreciated his art. These years laid the foundation for the operatic masterpieces that would immortalize Mozart, showing him as a composer who could combine virtuosity, expression, and dramatic intelligence.
Chapter 15. The Marriage of Figaro. Art and Politics. With the composition of Le Nozze di Figaro, The Marriage of Figaro, in 1786, Mozart reached a high point in his operatic career. The work was written in collaboration with the librettist Lorenzo da Ponte and is still considered a masterpiece that combines both musical brilliance and socio-critical expressiveness. Figaro was not only an artistic triumph, but also a mirror of the social tensions and political debates of the 18th century. The plot is based on a play by Pierre-Augustin Caron de Beaumarchais, which caused a sensation in France in 1784. It tells of servants and nobles, of intrigues, jealousy, love, and the assertion of reason and morality over class privileges. The choice of this material was risky. Criticism of the aristocracy was politically sensitive at the time, and the play had been banned in its original form in several countries. Mozart and da Ponte, however, managed to musically shape the material in such a way that it both entertained and conveyed subtle social criticism. Musically, The Marriage of Figaro impresses with the integration of arias, duets, and ensembles that are dramaturgically and emotionally closely coordinated. Especially the ensemble scenes, in which several characters act and sing at the same time, show Mozart's ability to combine complex plot and musical structure.
Each character is given an independent musical language that makes character traits, emotions, and relationships audible. The result is a lively, organic stage set that transports the social tensions as well as the comic elements of the plot. The opera is also a masterpiece of character drawing. Figaro, Susanna, the Countess, and the Count are portrayed individually through their arias and duets, while recurring musical motifs underline the psychological depth of the characters. Mozart succeeds in combining humor, suspense, and drama into a unity that both entertains and emotionally captivates the audience. Politically, Figaro was important because it questioned social structures. The music intensified the subtlety of the message. The servants are not portrayed as mere comic figures, but as clever, capable individuals who assert themselves against the arbitrariness of the nobility. This depiction reflected the emerging ideas of the Enlightenment, according to which humanity, reason, and equality should be placed above class privileges. The premiere in Vienna was a great success. The audience, which was both aristocratic and bourgeois, reacted enthusiastically to the combination of wit, dramatic tension, and musical virtuosity. Mozart finally established himself as a leading opera composer and proved that his works could be both artistically demanding and appealing. The Marriage of Figaro thus marks a turning point in Mozart's career. It is not only an opera of incomparable musical quality, but also a document of the time that shows how art can reflect and influence social issues. Mozart succeeded in combining virtuosity, depth of character, and social criticism, qualities that make his operas timeless masterpieces and cement his reputation as one of the greatest geniuses in music history.
Chapter 16. Don Giovanni and International Successes. After the overwhelming success of The Marriage of Figaro, Mozart continued his collaboration with Lorenzo da Ponte and in 1787 created what is now considered one of his greatest operatic masterpieces, Don Giovanni. A mixture of comedy, drama, and tragedy, this opera demonstrates Mozart's extraordinary ability to combine music, character drawing, and plot into an unforgettable unity. Don Giovanni tells the story of the unscrupulous seducer Don Giovanni, his cunning servants, and the victims of his intrigues. Mozart and Da Ponte succeeded in making the complex psychological relationships between the characters musically visible. Each characterization, from the arrogant Don Giovanni to the resolute Donna Anna or the clever Zelina, is reinforced by its own musical motifs, arias, and ensembles. Mozart uses counterpoint, rhythm, and harmony to make morality, conflict, and emotional depth audible. The dramaturgical integration of music and plot is particularly remarkable. In ensemble scenes, different perspectives overlap, while at the same time, tension, humor, and tragedy are intertwined. Mozart's ability to musically organize multiple storylines makes Don Giovanni an example of the perfect fusion of music and drama. The opera shows how music brings characters to life and emotionally engages the audience directly. In addition to artistic brilliance, Don Giovanni also marked a step towards international fame. The opera was performed in Prague and Vienna, although the reactions were mixed. In Prague, the work was enthusiastically celebrated. In Vienna, on the other hand, some of the content and the complex structure were met with restraint. Nevertheless, Mozart's reputation as one of Europe's leading composers was consolidated. Musically, Don Giovanni shows Mozart's diversity and innovation. He combines traditional opera arias, recitatives, and ensembles with new harmonic and rhythmic ideas. In particular, the dramatic effect of the finale, in which Don Giovanni is dragged into hell by the ghostly figure of the commendator, demonstrates Mozart's ability to combine musical tension, theatrical effect, and moral message. The opera was also proof of Mozart's artistic independence. In contrast to his earlier works in Salzburg or Munich, he was able to experiment as a freelance composer in Vienna, exploring new styles and realizing his personal artistic visions. This was a decisive factor in his development as an opera master and in his international success.
Don Giovanni consolidated Mozart's reputation not only in Austria but also throughout Europe. His works were performed in numerous cities, and Mozart established himself as a composer who combined music, theater, and character drawing into a universal form of expression. This phase shows him as an artist who possessed not only technical and melodic ingenuity, but also the ability to translate human emotions and social issues into timeless music. The opera is thus a highlight in Mozart's oeuvre, a work that combines musical innovation, dramatic sophistication, and psychological depth and established his international fame. Don Giovanni demonstrates why Mozart is still celebrated today as one of the greatest composers in music history.
Chapter 17. Late Works, from the Piano Concertos to the Magic Flute. Mozart's late Viennese years, from about 1785 until his death in 1791, were a phase of extraordinary creativity and productive diversity. During this time, he created some of his most significant works that had a lasting impact on both the development of classical music and his personal artistic legacy. A focus of this phase was the piano concertos, which Mozart composed both for himself as a soloist and for public performances. In particular, the piano concertos number 20 in D minor, number 21 in C major, and number 24 in C minor show his ability to combine virtuosity, expression, and orchestral sophistication. The concerts were not only platforms for one's own playing, but also intimate dialogues between soloist and orchestra, in which musical themes, dynamics, and harmony are masterfully coordinated. These works set standards for the development of the concert format in the 19th century. In addition to the concerts, numerous symphonies were also written during this time, documenting Mozart's maturity as an instrumental composer. Symphony No. 38, Prague, No. 39 in E-flat major, and the famous Symphony No. 41, Jupiter, show his ability to develop complex thematic structures, use orchestral diversity, and combine melodic elegance with dramatic tension. The Jupiter Symphony in particular demonstrates Mozart's masterful mastery of musical form and innovation through its contrapuntal structure and the fusion of 4 independent motifs in the final movement. Another milestone of these years was Mozart's opera, The Magic Flute, 1791, a work that differs significantly from his earlier operas. It combines elements of the Singspiel tradition with deep symbolism, Masonic ideas, and emotional expressiveness. The opera deals with themes such as wisdom, love, trial, and moral development, and uses music to convey both dramatic action and philosophical messages. The arias and ensembles are technically demanding, but at the same time expressive and comprehensible, making the work appealing to both aristocratic and middle-class audiences. During these years, Mozart also composed sacred music, including the Requiem in D minor, which he did not complete at the time of his death. This composition combines dramatic expressiveness, intimate religiosity, and orchestral mastery, and shows how Mozart was able to develop his musical creativity at the highest level even in his later years, which were marked by illness and financial strain. Mozart's late works are characterized by a mature synthesis of form, expression, and innovation. They show the fusion of technique and emotion, of counterpoint and melody, of dramatic action and musical logic. These works mark the pinnacle of his work and bear witness to a composer who consistently implemented his artistic vision even under personal and financial challenges. Mozart's late Viennese years are thus characterized by compositional abundance, artistic mastery, and a deep connection between emotion and structure. From the piano concertos to the late symphonies to the Magic Flute and the unfinished Requiem, his unwavering pursuit of perfection, his ability to move people musically, and his enduring importance for music history are evident.
Chapter 18. Illness, Debts, and the Mysterious Requiem. The last years of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart's life were marked by physical ailments, financial difficulties, and continuous, often desperate work pressure. Despite his artistic fame, he was not financially secure. Commissioned work, concerts, and private lessons had to cover his livelihood, his family, and the high demands on his lifestyle. This phase shows that a musical genius was not necessarily associated with material prosperity, but often worked under enormous pressure and strain. Mozart increasingly suffered from health problems. Contemporary reports point to illnesses such as fever, exhaustion, and skin rashes, which severely affected his everyday life. At the same time, the immense work pressure he imposed on himself increased the physical strain. He continued to compose with extraordinary intensity, despite illness and fatigue, and showed an almost superhuman capacity. During this phase, Mozart received a mysterious commission. He was to compose a Requiem in D minor, a commemoration of the dead of an unknown patron who wished to remain anonymous. This assignment weighed heavily on him, not only because of the emotional weight of the music, but also because of the mysterious circumstances. The Requiem became a symbol of Mozart's last creative phase and of the tragic connection between the end of his life and the artistic climax. Financially, Mozart was in a precarious state. Despite public recognition, the income was uncertain and irregular. Assignments were often short-term and tied to strict deadlines. Concerts could only partially secure one's livelihood, and obligations to family and home required additional funds. This constant juggling between artistic aspirations and financial reality was a considerable burden that shaped his last years. Despite illness and debts, Mozart continued his creative work unchecked. He composed operas, symphonies, chamber music, and the Requiem with an intensity that demonstrated his artistic maturity, emotional depth, and innovative power. The Requiem remained unfinished when Mozart died on 5 December 1791, but the music already shows the masterful combination of mourning, sublimity, and dramatic expression in the existing movements. Mozart's last years reveal the paradoxical reality of genius, the highest artistic achievement under extreme personal pressure. Illness, financial worries, and the mysterious nature of the Requiem assignment reinforce the aura of tragedy around his death and contribute to the creation of legends. At the same time, this phase documents that Mozart was able to create works of everlasting beauty and expressiveness even in extremely stressful situations. His death left not only the family in financial hardship, but also the music world in deep dismay. The unfinished Requiem was later completed by a pupil of Mozart and is still considered a symbolic masterpiece that condenses life, death, and artistic greatness into music. Chapter 19. Mozart's Death in 1791, Myths and Reality. The death of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart on 5 December 1791 marked the tragic end of one of the greatest musical geniuses in history. At the same time, his death was surrounded by numerous myths that dramatize his life and work to this day. However, a closer look at the historical facts reveals both the human fragility and the extraordinary artistic achievement that shaped Mozart's last year of life. Mozart died in Vienna only 35 years old after a long period of illness. Contemporary reports speak of symptoms such as fever, rashes, swelling, and physical weakness. The exact cause of death has not yet been clearly clarified. Historians suspect a combination of infectious diseases, physical exhaustion, and possibly an acute rheumatic disease. Despite his state of health, Mozart continued to work until shortly before his death, especially on the Requiem and other compositions, which underlines his extraordinary work discipline and creativity. There are numerous legends surrounding Mozart's death. One of the most famous tales of an anonymous client who commissioned the Requiem in order to foresee Mozart's death or to give him a mysterious commission. This legend has been romanticized over centuries and reinforced by literature, theater, and film, although historical sources describe the circumstances of the Requiem commission more soberly. A wealthy nobleman commissioned Mozart. The identity remained anonymous for various reasons, probably due to courtly etiquette and discretion. Another myth motif is the funeral myth. Mozart was buried in a simple, communal grave in the St. Mark's Cemetery in Vienna, not, as is often romanticized, in a pompous single grave. This form of burial corresponded to the Viennese practice of the time for citizens, even for internationally known personalities. Nevertheless, the simplicity of the burial contributed to the impression that Mozart's death was tragic and marked by immediacy, mysticism, and melancholy. However, the historical context of his death also shows the social and economic reality. Mozart left behind his family, children, and debts. The family's economic hardship reflects the often precarious situation of freelance artists in the 18th century. Fame and recognition did not automatically mean financial security. After his death, his wife Constance had to actively ensure that the estates completed commissions and made Mozart's music accessible to the public. Artistically, Mozart left behind an incomparable legacy. His Requiem remained unfinished, but the existing movements demonstrate a depth, expressiveness, and mastery that make him immortal beyond death. His operas, symphonies, concertos, and chamber music works show a continuous pursuit of innovation, expression, and perfection. Mozart's death therefore underlines not only the tragedy of an early loss, but also the coherence of a life's work that inspired generations of composers, musicians, and listeners. Mozart's death in 1791 was at the same time the end of a life that ranged from child prodigy to mature genius, and the beginning of a mythologization that inseparably linked his music and his image. The combination of short lifespan, extraordinary productivity, and personal tragedies made him a figure that fascinates both as a person and as an artistic symbol.
Chapter 20: Aftermath and Legend. Mozart in Music, Culture, and Myth. The death of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart marked the end of his life, but his music and influence have had a lasting impact on the world to this day. He was already known during his lifetime, but after his death, his fame grew into a legend that reached far beyond the borders of Vienna and Europe. Mozart was not only appreciated as a composer, but revered as a symbol of genius, creativity, and artistic perfection. The aftermath of Mozart first becomes apparent in the music itself. His operas, symphonies, concertos, and chamber music works influenced subsequent generations of composers, such as Beethoven, Schubert, Chopin, and many others. The combination of melodic beauty, formal clarity, and emotional depth set standards for classical music. Mozart's style was studied, copied, and further developed, and his works are still part of the standard repertoire of orchestras, opera houses, and chamber music ensembles worldwide. Mozart's influence was not limited to music, however. Culturally, he became an icon of genius. In literature, theater, film, and the visual arts, Mozart is often portrayed as the archetype of the musical prodigy and the tragic genius. His life, marked by early talent, extraordinary productivity, personal tragedies, and a short, intense life, provides a narrative template that has inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers for centuries. Works such as Peter Shaffer's Amadeus or the numerous biographical films and novels contribute to the mythologization, but also show how deeply Mozart's person and work have entered into cultural consciousness. Another aspect of the aftermath is the scientific and pedagogical examination of Mozart. Musicologists analyze his compositions, examining structures, harmonies, motifs, and orchestration. Mozart's works serve as teaching material in music academies worldwide and are indispensable for the understanding of classical music. The systematic analysis of his symphonies, operas, and piano concertos reveals not only technical skill, but also the ability to combine emotion, form, and expression, a core feature of his music that makes him an object of study and a benchmark for generations. In addition, Mozart influenced the social perception of artists. He exemplifies the idea that genius is not tied to status or origin, but that individual talent and hard work are decisive. Mozart combined natural talent with intensive training, tireless work, and the ability to pick up, transform, and surpass cultural currents. These aspects of his life still shape the image of the artistic genius in Western culture today. The legend of Mozart thus arose from the connection between life, work, and aftermath. It is based on the tension between child prodigy, opera master, virtuoso pianist, and the tragic fate of someone who died too early. His music embodies the idea that artistic mastery can unite human experience, emotion, and intellect, and it remains a timeless example of creativity and expressiveness. Today, Mozart is celebrated worldwide. Concert halls regularly perform his works. Opera houses show his operas on modern stages. Festivals are dedicated to his life and work, and his name is synonymous with musical genius. His works connect people of all generations, nations, and cultures, and remind us that art can have an impact beyond time. Mozart's aftermath is thus immortal. His music lives, inspires, moves, and defines what it means as a composer to capture the human experience in sound. His life and work are more than historical facts. They are a symbol of artistic excellence, human depth, and universal beauty that continues to fascinate generations of artists and music lovers to this day.